Good afternoon. Today we're going to talk about the effect of mob mentality on the founders and the creation of the Constitution. Mobs and the fear of mobs actually played a key role in how the Constitution was constructed and of the debates by many of the founders during the convention. In Federalist 55, James Madison stated, "In all very numerous assemblies of what characters composed, passion never fails to rest the spectre for reason. Had every Athenian citizen been Socrates, every Athenian assembly would have been a mob." And Madison came to this conclusion having studied philosophy and history, as many of the founders. And in ancient Greece, after his readings, he came to conclude that Clio, who was an ancient Athenian, actually swayed the Greek assembly in support of the Peloponnesian War, and other individuals swayed the populace and the assembly to start just randomly forgiving debts and things like that. And Madison looked back to that ancient history from his education, and he also looked to recent history to him from 1770 with the Boston Massacre that resulted in the death of many colonists during a riot opposing the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts, which increased the taxes on the colonial people who were subjects of Great Britain. And also fresh in his memory in 1786 was Shays' Rebellion. And Shays' Rebellion was actually a rebellion by a 39-year-old from Massachusetts named Daniel Shays. There was lots of debt these people were incurring. Their homes or their farms were being foreclosed on. Shays led a rebellion where they seized armaments and tried to shut down the Massachusetts state buildings to prevent their farms from being confiscated. And this, in particular, Shays event showed the founders that the Articles of Confederation really weren't effective. They couldn't raise an army. And many of the founders believed that Shays' Rebellion was proof that the Articles were just simply too weak. So these are the thoughts of the founders in Madison, based on philosophy, based on historical context of what they'd seen in the past. And, being intelligent people, they studied history to determine things such as, well, not things such as so much, but what not to do. You look to history for examples of mistakes and try to, not repeat those same mistakes over again. And, that's generally a good idea. If you read Federalist 10, we kind of get into Madison's ideas of how to prevent the influence of the mob and demagogues in the public sphere. In Federalist 10, Madison states that there's two methods to cure the mischief of factions. And he says the first method is to remove all causes. And that's pretty obvious. And the second one is to control the effects of factions. So as far as removing all causes, Madison believes there's two ways to remove all causes of faction. And number one is to destroy liberty. That there is no freedom, that things are dictated to you, and that liberty as a cause of faction must be removed from the public space. But Madison refers to removal of liberty as the removal of air from fire. It will just kill liberty and kill our system. So Madison discards that. And then also in Federalist 10, his other cure is to give people all the same passions and interests. And history showed us, well, Madison says that that's impossible. Everybody has different opinions, and giving all people the same passions and interests is impossible. But it has been tried after the Constitution. You can look to the French Revolution through the Reign of Terror. You can look to Nazi Germany and the fact that Hitler was democratically elected. And you can look to the Soviet Union as examples of systems where the mischief of factions is cured by controlling what people think. So obviously Madison was right that people are never, we're never going to agree on the same thing, but at the same time, the future has shown that you can't really cause people to think exactly the same way either. So that leaves us with Madison's second suggestion is controlling the effects of faction. So the way the Constitution was drafted, intentionally by the fathers, the founding fathers, kept this in mind, this idea of keeping the mobs as far away from elected government as possible, because they did have these legitimate fears, which came completely true a year or two later in the French Revolution, where Robespierre wound up the French populace against the monarchy and basically against everything. And the mob actually eventually turned on him, and he ended up dying. In any event, at the convention, the founders, in Federalist 47, they explain this as well. We have separation of powers, legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch, so that the powers of each different branch of government are separate. And this is an idea that the founders got from Montesquieu, a French philosopher. Not only did they separate the powers into different functions, into different branches, the founding fathers were very cognizant of separating the people from the levers of government. They were afraid that faction and demagogues would rile people up and move them in a way that would be detrimental to society. So they tried to make some insulation between the electorate and the federal government. And there's a bunch of ways they did this. And the first way was the House of Representatives is elected by the people directly. We elect people based on population, and we elect our representatives to go to the House of Representatives directly. We elect them every 2 years. So it's quick, it's fluid, we're electing them directly. There's no insulation. That is the people's house. That's the house where the populace and the factions can go a little crazy. That it was intentionally made that way so that there was a quick turnaround of the representatives that could reflect the changing ideas of the populace. The Senate had two layers. Originally, the people would elect their state legislatures, their state representatives, and then those state legislatures would elect the senators. So they were two times removed from the people. The senators were, and that was in part to allow for a little bit more states' rights because the state legislatures elected the senators. But it was also important to distance the Senate from the people in an effort to be able to cool down what's happening in the House. So they gave the senators 6-year terms and had them elected by the legislatures to remove them from popular feelings, or just they knew that society could fluctuate really quickly, so they put a lever in there so that the senators would be able to slow things down. George Washington called it the saucer for the tea. So it's where everything cools off. And then we talk about this now. You hear a lot of people talking about the Electoral College and why it should be abolished and that we should go straight towards a majority rule. But the founders actually put that extra layer in there much the same way as they did with the Senate. We don't actually elect the president. We elect an elector that goes to Congress who actually elects the president. And that was intentional, again, to distance the levers of government from the inflammatory, sometimes crazy factions inside our government. And then the Supreme Court is even further removed. They are appointed by a president who's gone through these 2 layers, and then they're confirmed by senators who also went through 2 layers. This was fundamentally changed with the 17th Amendment that allowed for senators to be elected directly by the people, thereby decreasing some states' rights because people are electing the senators as opposed to the state legislatures, but also brought the Senate a little bit closer to the people. And there's an argument to be made that the Senate's a little too close and the House is a little too close, and that the functioning of the way the Senate was supposed to cool off legislation has been negatively impacted by the enactment of this, the ratification of the 17th Amendment. And at this time, there is a small movement to get rid of the 17th Amendment and go back to the senators being elected by the state legislatures, in part to allow or to help that distance between the mob and the government. So that's where we sit right now. And I think there's an important point to be made about just mobs in general. This was actually, this is out of the book The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind from 1895. It's a French philosopher named Gustave Le Bon. And what he says gives a really good idea of how crowd psychology works. The masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to deify error, if error seduce them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. I think this quote, although it's very far after the Constitution, is very instructive as to the mobs and factions. Once these mobs and factions get going, and it's not even about truth anymore, it's just about who's in control. So our founding fathers, although Le Bon wrote, almost 100 years or over 100 years later, those same ideas kind of apply. They're really trying to distance our elected officials from the people, not because of any other reason, that they didn't trust the people, because the people, their attitudes and proclivities can change so quickly that they wanted the government to be able to avoid that kind of influence by social groups, as opposed to having elected representatives that did have the time to make good decisions and kind of slow legislation down so that the mob doesn't control all the levers of government, which typically leads to destruction, as French Revolution, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union. So with that, that concludes my discussion today. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, and thank you very much.